Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 2 of our Westworld podcast, Set the Westworld on Fire, where we discuss the ins and outs of HBO's new television show, Westworld. I'm Ryan Shepard. With me today, I've got Cy.
How's it going, everybody?
In this episode that we're going to be discussing today, it was called Chestnut. The first one was called The Original, which we had an idea of why they called it that at the end of the episode. Not sure why they're calling this one Chestnut, but maybe we'll figure it out as time goes on. We're going to break it down a little bit differently than we did last episode. We're going to go through each major plot line, and we're going to try to keep that going throughout this series so we can add a little bit more organization to it, and then we'll discuss each one as we go along. So this particular episode, I personally thought was a great follow-up to the first episode. I was a little on the fence about some of the themes and the way that it was going in the first episode, but this one definitely has hooked me, and it's keeping me interested. What do you think, Cy, on the whole, not going into any detail?
On the whole, Ryan, I absolutely agree with you. I did think this was a very strong follow-up. And I understand how it goes too. In the first episode, we talked about in our last episode, in our last podcast, we talked about, how they really wanted to show how gratuitous they could be with the violence and the sex in it, and the nudity, I should say. But this episode, in the same time, they also focused on what the plots are going to be. This time, they still have the same amount of both, yet they expand the story and they really keep you hooked on it. I mean, it's, as I commented last time, it's similar to, it's a sci-fi version of Game of Thrones almost. There are many different storylines. There are many different plot points. Every character has their own intentions depending on what storyline you like to follow the most. And it's really taking us to a very interesting destination, Ryan. I really think that this is that HBO has a hit on their hands, and again, I can't recommend the show enough for people who love sci-fi or just love good television.
Sure. So I should preface at this point, we're going to get into story spoilers. So if you're sensitive to that and you haven't seen the episode, you can go ahead and tune out right now. But we are going to get in depth now with the story.
Think of us as the moviespoiler.com.
Yeah.
If you like being spoiled, or if you've seen the episode, listen to our take.
Yep. So the episode starts out with a new character actually being introduced into the mix. William, who's a first-timer to Westworld, and he's coming with his friend that seems like he's been several times. He's a little reluctant and timid to kind of indulge Westworld and all of its ins and outs. And near the end, he does seem to get wrapped up in a storyline with Dolores, that famous can that keeps falling out of her grocery bag. He picks it up at the end of this episode. So we could be seeing a future storyline with them getting involved in some manner. What do you think about that, Cy?
I think you hit the head, Ryan. William entering the park with his friend Logan, who, and again, both of these guys appear to be, they appear to be somewhere in the private sector. They seem to be, they seem to have very well-paying jobs. William is a very introverted character. He seems very hesitant, maybe a little hesitant to enter the world, a little nervous or anxiety-ridden. Logan, on the other hand, is very apt to this world. He seems to be, if I have to say, he's almost as addicted as the Man in Black to Westworld to an extent. I mean, he loves going here. He loves engaging in all the debauchery that you see some of these people partake. It becomes clear because we see what happens with visitors, Ryan, when they first enter Westworld, or at least they're going to this virtual world. We see William coming in. He's there. Each individually is brought in by a what we assume to be a host outside of the virtual world, and they see how they hit on that. How this lady hits on him automatically, and William's very reserved about that.
Yeah, it
And when
seems to
they
be just their programming in order to loosen everybody up a little bit is to introduce them to a host, make them feel as comfortable as possible, and get them into the swing of things, so to speak. And
right,
he kind of rejects that a little bit. Partway through the show, indicating that he has somebody at home that he's trying to stay faithful to.
he is, and whether or not he's lying or not, Ryan, because personally I didn't believe that. I think he's, I honestly think he's just, really think he's just being very precautious about this whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to be like a young calf going into a herd, or the baby bear entering life for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Basically what I'm saying is this seems to be the birth of a new sentient, a new carbon-based life form going into the world for the first time. Let's put it that way.
So where do you think he's going in the story?
I think William represents the highest morality a human has in the show, at least thus far, in regards to the guests.
Sure.
I think that from what we've seen so far, he has good intentions, and he could be the I think he represents all that's noble in humanity in a world where you can commit sin and be unrepentant for it.
Mm-hmm.
If
so
you want to be theological.
He could turn down either the road of staying true or showing how Westworld can change somebody, essentially.
Yeah, that's how I feel, Ryan. Now, again, how that's going to be, I think, depends on his personality. From what I've seen, William seems to be a rather weak link. Like, he seems like he could be. It seems like with the right amount of temptation, he could be turned and be a follower of Logan, per se. I mean, think about it this way. If William was this hesitant, why did Logan talk him into doing this? Or why is William there in the first place? I think that's what we need to question. Does he do that if he's so hesitant? I mean, it's not like he lost a bet or something like that. And I don't think they're on a business trip they're getting all the ins and outs.
William kind of indicated, whether it was true or not, that Logan wasn't even really his friend.
Right, he's a coworker. Yeah. Henceforth, why? And doesn't that make it kind of weird if he has someone like a girlfriend or even a wife, and he's not bringing her to Westworld? Like, did he tell this person? Did he make this up? Why did Logan coerce him to do this? Because Logan really indicates is really kind of a bully, or at least he comes off as having bullyish tendencies. I mean, and you can just see that the way he acts towards the host. You know, he mistreats them. He stabbed somebody for Christ's sakes in a very gruesome manner. So William is all about the unrepentant sin. So we're gonna have to see where this takes place. Is William supposed to be the savior of some? Maybe not savior is too strong of a word, or not the right word, but is he supposed to represent the only thing good in humanity, or how is that going to go?
Yeah. Anyway, we'll see how William's character plays out, and hopefully he has a bigger role, because I enjoyed watching him.
It's an intriguing role, Ryan. I'm not ready quite yet to say if I'm on board fully with his storyline, but again, with Westworld, there's a lot of different storylines featuring the different characters. So I think, and honestly, and from what we're going to say, it's going to be hard to choose just one. But right. Why don't we continue?
So the next major storyline, at least in the timeline, and probably one of the bigger chunks of this episode, was the Man in Black storyline, which is definitely gaining steam here. So his storyline opens up with a guy named Lawrence being hung by, a host named Lawrence being hung by other hosts. Presumably he's some sort of criminal or whatever. And the Man in Black walks up and basically takes all of the, I don't know if you'd call them sheriffs or deputies or whoever they were
I'm pretty
capturing
sure they're
Lawrence.
U.S. Marshals and they're posse.
Okay.
I think that's the best way to put it, Ryan.
And he takes them all out and rescues Lawrence, essentially, and doesn't really rescue him because he ties him up and drags him behind his horse all the way to Lawrence's home town, so to speak, which seems to be in like a Mexican part of Westworld, like southern part, because there was like all that kind of architecture, and several of the characters were Mexican in that area. So that seems to be where he's from, and the Man in Black is specifically looking for the entrance to the maze that he found under Kissy's scalp that he took in the first episode. So at the end of the first episode, you see he has the scalp of one of these hosts, and there's something etched into the bottom of the scalp, and the Man in Black seems to think it's some sort of maze. That's what it looks like on the bottom of the scalp, with a human figure like in the middle. And yeah, that's what the Man in Black's goal right now is, and he believes that Lawrence is going to be able to help him get that information he's looking for. And through a series of again killing everybody, the Man in Black eventually breaks down. I guess the best way to say it would be to break down the programming routine in the hosts to kind of get to the raw emotion aspect of their programming, which kind of leads Lawrence's daughter to tell the Man in Black where he needs to go. There's still a lot of cryptic stuff with this storyline, because at the end of the first episode, I wasn't sure if this was actually a maze underneath the scalp or if it was just some sort of markings that just were haphazardly there. But the Man in Black seems to think it's an actual thing that he can go to, and is the quote-unquote, like, the key to the game that he's playing. He keeps referring to it as a game. I think one of the biggest things here was the overseers that are watching everything happen point out that the Man in Black seems to be killing a whole bunch of people and causing a lot of chaos. And one of the underlings is like, should we stop him? Should we slow him down? And Stubbs, who's the head of security, is like, basically says that man gets whatever he wants. He can do whatever he wants.
Which is interesting, Ryan. Why is that? Is he like do you think he could be like a main benefactor? Do you think he's providing a lot of income for Westworld? Because as you can tell, this theme park, or this virtual reality, is obviously not for the middle class. Obviously, you have to have a very high-paying job. But I think feel free to disagree with me if you'd like, but I'm starting to wonder if there's another reason besides what I just say. I don't necessarily think he's just a benefactor, or even a benefactor at all. I think there's something there that makes him important to the corporation, that meaning that he has the autonomy to do whatever he wants.
Yeah, there's got to be some tie that he has to somebody, whether it be Ford or somebody else who may be pulling the strings, that allows him to, like Stubbs said, basically do whatever he wants. He seems to be someone that may have left for a little while and came back. We're still not sure about that timeline, but he does indicate that he's been there for 30 years. He keeps saying that repeatedly over and over. So he's been there since the inception of Westworld. So I don't know. He seems strange. He seems like he's been there for so long that you'd think he would be a little bit more along with his investigation, if that's what he's conducting, if he's trying to break it down. My suspicion is he's there because Ford wants him to be there. I think Ford, and we'll get to this at the end of this discussion, has his own storyline that he's building. and I think the Man in Black may actually be playing a role in that. I think that so two things that I think the Man in Black has done that hasn't actually been attributed to him yet, but I think will in time, is one, the planting of the picture that Dolores' father found in the first episode. And near the end of this episode, Dolores finds a pistol buried also out at her farm, and I think that the Man in Black also put that there. And my suspicion is that gun that she found there is capable of killing people.
I'll get to that later, Ryan, but going back to where our discussion on the Man in Black, the thing that strikes me the most, or the impression I got, is that when it comes to Westworld, the Man in Black is completely addicted. Like, to me, this seems like an opiate-like addiction almost. He loves this. He either loves or despises this world so much that he wants to explore the most inner sanctums of it. And again, he keeps thinking in his mind, this is a game. He wants to be that guy to get to the final level. He wants to find a hidden level that very well may not even be there. So we don't, and like you said, Ryan, if this looks like a maze, but is it really a maze? Or is this guy in the Man in Black so far gone, he doesn't even realize what he's doing or doesn't even care what he's doing? Because this guy, the Man in Black, at least from hindsight, is perhaps one of the most evil characters here. We don't think that way because the hosts are robots and they're not actual people, which could very well be the Man in Black's reasoning for why he gets to do all of these evil things. Mm-hmm. But going back to your point, Ryan, if this character is related to Ford, perhaps what Ford is doing is he's introducing the element of chaos. Yeah. Because in life, and even in a good story, you need to have an antagonist, or you need to present a chaotic world. Otherwise, well, to put it blatantly, things would get dull, and sometimes things can't progress without chaos or some sort of distortion, mm-hmm. or without some sort of conflict, which is what the Man in Black encounters as with these hosts. Going back to the gun, Ryan, that's another question I had, whether or not that gun Dolores has is capable of killing humans, and whether or not maybe the Man in Black put it there to see if those if the hosts have their own free will, whether or not intentional or not, whether or not they would be capable of killing a guest to save a host, even though the hosts always get repaired and usually put right back in place.
Yeah, I think it's more the Man in Black has a full-on plan, and it's not just like, hey, I want to plant this gun here to see if Dolores will use it to kill people or to protect hosts. I think he has like a long-term plan. That's just my suspicions. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but I think that's that's the road we're going down, is that he's planting these things in very specific manners in order to get the outcome that he's looking for. And it may be something that he's tried to do before, just unsuccessfully, and this is like, the fifth iteration of it, and it's finally working. I'm not really sure.
Actually, Ryan, even though we've been discussing on the theory that the Man in Black placed the gun there, what if he didn't? What if Ford placed the gun there, intended it to be able to kill hosts, and what if he did that for the specific purpose of having the possibility of Dolores killing the Man in Black? Or
so you mean killing humans, capable of killing humans?
What if Ford did that so he could explore and make this and see if Ford really is this mad scientist, which is they're implying, and seeing what the effects would be? Because again, we were discussing what if the Man in Black placed this, but what if it wasn't him? What if this is really some sort of safety trigger? And what if this was concocted by someone else, like say Ford, who seems to have free range? Well, being the creator, he should have that anyway. So, I mean, again, it's very interesting to find out who is planting these clues. If it's just Ford, if it's the Man in Black, or if it's a combination of different people and individuals. Yep. If it's Ford, I think it would make sense because it would give them, or it could expand the scope of whether or not the hosts are capable of free will, or to see what they're capable of if given free will. But again, that's just a thought, just a theory.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. So the next big plot line here has to do with Maeve Millie, who is the head of the whorehouse in Westworld. And when she's first introduced into this episode, Dolores is there and she's having a flashback of one of the times that the town got massacred by some bandits or something like that. And this is one of those triggers for an error in the programming in their host brains or whatever. And Maeve comes over and Dolores turns to her. She says to Maeve, "These violent delights have violent ends," which is what Dolores's father whispered into her ear. And this seems to be the trigger that is causing the robots to malfunction. Because
it's a spoken virus, possibly.
Seems to be. And so this seems to trigger in Maeve a flashback of presumably an old memory of a scene in which she was attacked by Native Americans and a whole bunch of people were killed, blah, 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 blah. And she keeps having this vision throughout the episode, and she gets brought in because she starts malfunctioning. They give her the clear to go ahead, like don't retire her and everything like that. Except for one time, she gets brought in, and we kind of get an idea of a question we had last episode, which was, how do they repair all these robots? And it turns out that they just take them all in every night and repair them, apparently, because Maeve is on an operating table and they're repairing her, and she wakes up, and this is the first time she's had any sort of indication that there was anything outside of Westworld, and she's in this sterile hospital room and freaks the fuck out, basically. She escapes the room and finds her way into another area where they're repairing all sorts of robots, all the robots that were destroyed during that day. Teddy's there because he got shot several times during that day, and which he seems to be the Kenny of this situation, or
the Nordberg from the Naked Gun series.
He seems
poor James Marston. He's the character who's gotten the most abuse. Did he sign up knowing that he's going to get that he was going to get shot and killed this many times, Ryan?
He seems to be dying in every single day. So yeah, that's they end up catching her, and I'm not really sure what happened, if they decommissioned her or if they put her back into commission. Well, I'm not if that was left open-ended. I'm not really sure what happened there.
Honestly, Ryan, I'm not sure. I know the initial thought was that they were going to decommission her, or that was the initial decision. But I think they've still left that storyline up in the air, because the last we saw, she was subdued after walking nakedly through the facility, not even knowing what's going on. And again, Thandie Newton did a great job. Thandie Newton, by the way, is the character who plays Maeve, and she did a phenomenal job acting as any of us would if we were initially we initially were living in the 18th century or the 19th century, then waking up and we see a world that looks decades or perhaps centuries more advanced than what we're used to seeing.
Yeah, it was an interesting reaction, because it was the first time we had seen something like that, where a host was like taken aback, like, what's going on here?
Exactly. And again, what's even more interesting is the fact that she woke up, even though one of the I don't know, would you call them physicians or mechanics based on,
Yeah,
because I mean
I
again,
guess.
the hosts are replicants, androids, but the type of surgical maneuvers they were doing made them look more like surgeons.
Hmm.
So I mean again, there was organic tissue and blood. So I
Yeah,
mean again,
it's a combination, you know. Um, so yeah, this was a major issue because this was the second major malfunction we've seen relating to this this virus that's being spread throughout the androids, and I guess next episode we'll see where that goes, if more get infected, or what happens with Maeve. There is one thing I want to talk about quickly, but with Maeve, and that's one of her visions in which she's getting attacked by these Native Americans, and then she finds refuge inside a cabin, and as the Native Americans are surrounding the cabin, the door opens and it's the man in black, not one of the Native Americans. And he walks up to her, and it kind of cuts from there. That's actually when she wakes up in the hospital bed. And I'm not sure what's actually going on there. If that's something that happened in the past, if that's something that recently happened. That kind of leads me down the thought of the man in black has been on this road before, this path, and this is something that happened maybe 5-10 years in the past that she's now remembering, and this was just like maybe one of the times that the man in black tried to get as far as he is now and failed, or maybe step 10 or something like that. I'm not really sure where that stands.
It's possible, Ryan. I mean, again, let's not forget that Westworld has had, or at least they've given the impression that they've had numerous stories, and all of their characters seem to inhabit different roles. So it's possible that there could have been a storyline where, Maeve was someone on the frontier, perhaps, an explorer, not an explorer, excuse me, but like a pioneer of some sorts. Could be just another storyline that she was in that she's somehow remembering that wasn't completely taken out of her memory banks. Or again, it could be a sign of showing that the hosts are now starting to become sentient and starting to become more alive, and now are starting to recollect their memories of past programs.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's the impression I got. Again, or I mean, it very well could be that we're dealing with androids. It could be a crash in the system where they're merging memories or different storylines together. So it could be perhaps that she didn't really experience that at all, and she's just maybe it was something traumatic that happened in a storyline, and she's merging it together with both merging both fiction and reality. Mm-hmm. So again, whether or not I'm thinking too deep into this, who knows? But this is Westworld, Ryan, where we can be whoever the fuck we want to be, meaning we can think however the fuck we want to think, so to speak.
That's true. This isn't Westworld, Si. This is the real world.
I know, Ryan, but you have to think in terms of Westworld while viewing Westworld, is what I'm saying.
So the next major character line here is with Bernard, and there's a scene between Bernard and Ford where Bernard suggests that there may be some sabotage going on that's leading to all these malfunctions, etc., etc. But Ford seems to be leading him away from that notion. I'm not sure why, whether Ford has a motivation there or if he just feels that it's really not true. But that's a possibility that's led to in this particular episode. And I think that is kind of where we're going with this. That's just my personal take on it. I think that it is some sort of sabotage, and we'll see how that pans out. He then has an odd interaction with Dolores in which she's brought in to be assessed, basically, and it's really hard to tell whether or not Dolores is responding obediently to commands or if she's just pretending to. Because there's a particular scene where she says, "Did I do something wrong?" Bernard says, "No, you didn't do anything wrong." And then Dolores responds with, "Did you do something wrong?" And that kind of triggers Bernard in a way that's like, that's not right. That's not something that we've programmed him to say or something like that. But then he just like erases it from her memory basically, and she says that it did, but I don't know if it actually did. So that was a strange interaction that I think is indicative of where specifically Dolores' character is going in terms of like, is she trustworthy? Is she not?
I was going to say, let's not forget that during Bernard's interaction with Dolores, he requests or programs that she delete this entire conversation. So that kind of gives us an impression that Bernard wants to have this interaction completely off the record, because maybe Bernard realizes that he did make a mistake and maybe either too proud or too afraid to connect, to not necessarily correct it, but to admit it, or that he doesn't want other people within the corporation to find out, fearing that he might be, blacklisted or fired or perhaps even ridiculed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll see where that goes, if it's just Dolores acting on her own or if there's something else going on there. And then, of course, her storyline wraps up with her meeting William, which we mentioned earlier before.
Going back to Dolores quickly, Ryan, let's say for a minute that this sabotage is like a virus. It could be perhaps that with the destruction of at first I was going to say that Dolores might be what we call victim zero, or be the person who carries it and then spreads it to the other hosts. And let's also not forget, Dolores is implied or said to be the oldest model there. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that she knows more than she's letting on, and she has a grander scheme of things on what she wants to plan. Because again, we see her being, out of all of them, despite being the oldest, perhaps being the most advanced, perhaps being the oldest, and perhaps being the person who's becoming more sentient as the series progresses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
that's how I wanted to end that.
I think that's the road that's going down, that she's definitely not letting on to her true intentions, and et cetera, et cetera. So then we have some storylines going on. Also, Bernard and Teresa appear to be having an affair.
Whoa, Bernard is actually a ladies' man. Now, Bernard is probably one of the more introverted characters of the show. Now, I mean, again, maybe that's just how Jeffrey Wright's portraying him. But again, honestly, Ryan, I didn't see that coming until immediately when Teresa just went into went inside his house. Doesn't that strike you as odd, Ryan, that the workers also live in this facility, or at least it seems that they live in this facility? I haven't seen any cars, so I'm wondering if they actually not only work there, but live there.
Yeah, I imagine they do, in order to be on call 24/7 and to, for secrecy and stuff like that. I imagine that's probably why they do that.
Well, you know what they say, Ryan, the hosts may not have needs, but men certainly do. So, and women too. Let me not be sexist. I want to include all of them. So, I'm sure they need attachments of some sort. But I did find that interesting, although I would like to see, I wonder what the corporate policy is regarding after-work interactions between employees. I wonder how up for
I guess we'll see where that storyline goes, if it goes any farther or not. So to wrap this up, we have some Ford stories here. Partway through the episode, Ford takes an elevator up into the outskirts of Westworld and comes across a young boy who is presumably a human, which with the way that the boy's acting and they're conversing. And Ford kind of walks with him for a little while, almost acting like an old friend or a grandfather or something like that, just imparting little wisdoms on him and things like that.
Right, and he seemed to take pity on the boy more than anything. He saw him alone and wanted a companion, and he wanted to be a paternal figure of sorts, I would say.
And near the end of this interaction, it's proven that the little boy is actually a host, And it seems like this is a program that Ford has almost designed for himself, almost to maybe fill some sort of need that he needs for a companion or a son figure or something like that. Doesn't seem like Ford has any family, at least immediate, close to him or anything like that. So maybe this is some way to make him feel a little bit more comfortable in his position as a creator of robots that are indistinguishable from humans.
Or perhaps wanting to create his own reality and perhaps see what it's like to have a child or a grandson or to have just to have offspring. Because apparently there doesn't seem to be any Tim and Lex like what John Hammond had in Jurassic Park. So, but then again, whether or not I'd send my grandchildren out into a park full of dinosaurs as compared to a park full of robots that aren't allowed to hurt you, well, that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But
so we'll see where that's probably just more of an insight into Ford's character more than a side storyline or anything like that. So we also had the revelation of Lee's, who's the narrative director, brand new storyline that he's been talking about called Odyssey on Red River, which seems to be a big nasty interaction with Native Americans and bandits and treasure hunts and all sorts of stuff that is indicative of everything that we've seen at Westworld. And Ford seems to agree with that as well, saying that it's not actually going to happen because it's a little bit too rote and uninventive.
Right. What it was, Ryan, is this seemed to be what Lease wanted to do seemed to be the same thing as like what every 1950 Western was, and even a little bit of Manifest Destiny, because, you know, he portrayed the Native Americans as savages. It's something out of Deadwood, essentially. You know, portraying the Native Americans as savages, saying you can do whatever you want with the women, go on this grand Western adventure. It was a completely unoriginal idea, and I think Ford saw through that and basically was like, no. This is not what we're doing. The guests don't come here to see what they want to see. They come here to discover who they could be. Yeah. So he's implying that Westworld is really for the guests to discover who they really are or who they really could be, not what they want to see, or that's not what attracts them to Westworld, which is a very valid point to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's that was obviously a disappointment for Lee, and we'll see where that goes if he comes up with a new plan or whatever the situation is. So we're wrapping this episode up with Ford and Bernard walking in the outskirts of Westworld like Ford did earlier with the boy, and Bernard saying, you know, you dismissing Lee's storyline is kind of a big blow to the guests and the shareholders who were promised a new storyline. And Ford says, oh, they're going to get a new storyline. Something I've been working on. And we end with a shot of an old church steeple buried in the sand out in the middle of the desert. So we have some indication of what Ford may be working on.
Indeed, Ryan. And again, we discussed this earlier, and we have a few different theories on this. Mine is that the reason Ford is doing this is, and my implication is that he wants these creations of his to be more sentient, and he wants to introduce religion. But the key is, or what I think it is that he wants these sentient, the hosts, to be sentient, but to worship Robert Ford and not necessarily worship the Christian religion. Because, and again, these little subtle hints dropped. At one time, Ford says you can't. What was it that he said? You can't be acquainted with you can't be God without being acquainted with the devil. That seems to implicate that Ford wants to be a god, but that you can't be all good without being or all powerful without being all good, which I think is something that Ford wants. He wants to be worshipped by his creators. He wants to view himself as that godlike role. Mm-hmm. That's what I think going down. What that seems to implicate.
That's a possibility. My initial thought was maybe he is trying to repent for his sins, and this is kind of his way of doing that, creating a storyline revolving around maybe getting the guests to come out to this place, and instead of being all about the sex and the violence, a alternative to that, because he seems to have gone in a way where he's just showing all the evils and horrible things humans can do, and now he's kind of wanting to redeem himself a little bit, and maybe this is the way he's going. I think it's going to backfire, obviously, because this is a show and it's going to have some sort of plot. That can't just be a happy ending. Oh, and Ford creates this thing and he's happy now at the end. But
No. I completely agree with that sentiment, Ryan. I do not believe that a show as dark as Westworld can have a happy ending. Maybe Ford's intentions are he wants these hosts and guests to cohabitate with each other and live in harmony. But again, Ryan, I think as and I don't want to get too spiritual here, but from an organized religion standpoint, religion there have been many wars fought in the name of God, depending on what you call him. So again, it adds another interesting point to your theory.
Yeah.
Going forward from it. But again, it's still too early to tell what Ford's intentions are. So it's going to be interesting where that step takes place. But I mean, again, what is the real story? What is Ford trying to do? Yep. That is the main story. That is the main concept we have for this, and of course the other storylines as well.
I guess we'll have to find out next week on Westworld, because that's where this episode ended up. And I like I said earlier at the beginning of the episode, I thought this was a very strong episode. I think it's doing a good job of progressing all of the storylines just enough to keep you interested, but not so much as to giving it all away. And it's, in my opinion, a little bit stronger than the first episode, simply because they didn't have to worry about all of the overdone introductions and things like that. There are also no overt symbols like that fly from the first episode, which bugged me.
Right. That's putting it rather that's putting it rather literally and figuratively, Ryan. But yeah, no, absolutely, you're absolutely right. This is still a very interesting series. All of these people have really good screen presences. I mean, again, Anthony Hopkins, whenever he's on the screen, he just has such a commanding presence. But it shouldn't just be lost there. We should still concentrate on other characters. Dolores, played by Evan Rachel Wood, Ed Harris. But, I mean, again, this is just a really dark but fascinating show. And we want to know how, like The Man in Black, we want to know how deep Westworld can go. That's where we stand on things currently.
Yep. So we'll be back next week with another episode of Set the Westworld on Fire, and guess we'll ride off into the sunset now, huh?
I guess so, Ryan. And for all of you listeners out there, please send us your thoughts, comments, questions on what you think of Westworld, and whether or not. And I don't know, Ryan. How many times do you think James Marsden is going to get killed throughout the first season? Because I don't know what happened. I don't know why James Marsden's trying to atone for all the bad, career decisions he's made in his life.
I'd like to see him die in every episode, not in a morbid way, just in a comedic way. All right, we're gonna wrap it up. Guess we'll end it on a yeehaw.
Yeehaw!
Yeehaw!
I'm gonna go find me some robot hookers.
Get along, little doggy.